Hey, yo, what's the deal? Miss your boy Tag from Pro Wrestling Tag. You know what I mean? As a this recording right now, it is 5:27 p.m. But the upload time is between 11:30 and 11:45 p.m. August 24th, 2025. Now, I mean, this is the last video of the entire day. You know what I'm saying? And you know, AEW Forbidden Door this year is hands down the pay-per-view, the worst pay-per-view of the year. Bar fucking none. The only funny thing that happened in that pay-per-view, you know what I'm saying? Because I don't know if it's still going on. If it is, who gives a fuck? The funniest thing that happened in that pay-per-view was, and I'm not going to front, the thing that they're doing with the Young Bucks is funny. You know what I'm saying? With the Rod and Todd and, you know, having like jobbers and losers, and then they came out to fucking Hanson's Bop. Like, yo, what the fuck? I've not heard that shit in what? Since 96? Like almost 30 years ago? Ooh, bop, 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 ooh, bop. I remember they used to play that shit in the box. You know what I mean? Anyone who's in my age range, y'all know what I'm talking about, the box. So speaking of bad guys and such, oh yeah, the whole Jon Moxley, the fucking Jon Moxley fork spot to Darby Allin. Like, yo, this is the only way they're gonna grab headlines, man. This is why this company is in the shit that it's in. You know what I'm saying? But speaking of wrestlers and such, you know, the one greatest thing that can happen to any professional wrestler, you know, male or female, hands down, is getting booed. I'm going to tell you why. I'm definitely going to tell you why, okay? When a wrestler either debuts, you know, no matter if they're a blue-eyed or a red-eyed heel and such, right? You're always gonna have fans boo, depending on who the person is, right? Especially if the person has a name, they're making a big debut and such. You know, it definitely seems like wrestlers, you know, like when they get cheered and such, right? You know, a face gets cheered and everything. You know, you can only cheer that wrestler for so long. And we're talking about wrestlers who actually like debut in a company. You know what I mean? Like you can only cheer them for so long to the point where like you just start to boo them after a while, right? You know, and the face is basically doing whatever he or she needs to do to garner sympathy. But fans, for some weird reason, right? It is today's fans. You know, they don't want clean-cut baby faces at this point. You know what I mean? So, you know, when you try to be a face, a total face and such, right? It don't work. And the fans just love to fucking cheer. I mean, they just love to boo. You know what I mean? They just love to boo. And I'm gonna tell you something right now. Hold on. When you are a person who is a full-fledged face, right? You know, yeah, you might think that booing could be the worst thing. But let me tell you why booing could be the best thing that ever happened to a pro wrestler. Okay? The reason why the best thing about booing, you know, why booing can happen, you know, to a pro wrestler, why it's the best thing that can happen is a shell is broken. Right? A shell is broken to the point where, you know, a wrestler's going to go, okay, a wrestler can go into a couple of these avenues, right? A face can go into a couple of these avenues. A face can go, well, all right, you know what? Maybe I'm a little too ass kissy, right? Maybe I'm kissing ass just a little too much, right? Or that wrestler could say, all right, you know, this isn't going to work. You motherfuckers want to see how I really am? No problem. Or you want to bring the worst out of me? All right, no problem. You know, one person I think about when it's like that is Chris Jericho. When Chris Jericho was in WCW, right? Remember, he used to come out as a face, and then he used to go to the fans. He used to turn, you know, his back to, put his back to the fans and have the fans touch his chest. And then the camera showing like, yeah, baby, let's go, baby. You know what I'm saying? Too much of that, right? it would be too much of it. It's a fucking detriment, right? And it's not his call. This is what WCW was doing. This is what WCW was telling him. You know what I mean? And eventually he turned heel. And when he turned heel, that's when you see a lot of character work. A lot of different character work and stuff, right? In terms of how he can really be as a heel, right? Even the smallest nuances can be, a big thing when it comes down to heels in pro wrestling, right? So if we're talking about, someone being booed, it's a blessing in disguise. It really, really is. You know what I mean? Like, becoming a heel is a blessing in disguise. Because what happens is, when you are a heel, right? When you are a heel, you basically absorb all your heelness for a good period of time, right? Until it's actually time to become a fucking face again, right? Like what we're seeing with John Cena, right? John Cena is now a face. And so, he said, fuck it, let me be a heel, and this is what people were waiting for. And it did work for a good period of time, but of course, it did flounder and such. I don't know if it was him or if it was WWE Creative or whatnot. But again, at times, like, you need to turn to the dark side. You need to go to the dark to get to the light. You know what I mean? Like, put it this way, every single fucking day when you wake up in the morning, there's light, right? Then after a couple of hours, when it hits like maybe after like 8:30 going into 9 p.m., then it becomes dark, right? And then after that, around 6:30, 7 o'clock, it becomes light again. So you have to, you have to go to the light to get to the dark, and vice versa. You know what I'm saying? And so, with being a heel and a face, the fans basically, like I said, it's a blessing in disguise. It is a true blessing in disguise, honestly, to go heel. It really is. Could the same thing be said towards the other side? It's possibly so. It's possibly so. But then again, you have wrestlers who, they don't want to be faces. I'm pretty sure the majority of pro wrestlers do not want to be the face. You know what I mean? I'm sure that they want to be the heel, because at least with the heel, you can do a lot more. I mean, you have wrestlers who say, fuck it, I want to be a face. I mean, I want to be a good guy. I want to play a good guy, right? Because, yeah, it means stuff to kids and everything else. They want to be looked at as a role model and such, right? But eventually, you're going to have to turn heel at some point. Every wrestler turns fucking heel. Even Sting turned heel. Sting turned heel at some point, right? Sting turned heel. Hulk Hogan turned heel, right? Steve Austin turned heel, right? Roman Reigns turned fucking heel. You know what I mean? So a wrestler's secret weapon, honestly, is turning heel. Because here's the other thing too. When you also turn heel, I said this before, I'm gonna say this again. You start to shed this. You start to shed the stink out of being too much of a oversaturated babyface. Too much, right? And you start to show realism of your character. When I think of that, I think of two people: the Usos and the New Day. You know what I mean? Like, they both had to turn heel. They both had to turn heel to show their true characteristics. You know what I mean? And it worked, especially for the Usos. Especially for the fucking Usos. Because the Usos as faces, I'm sorry. They were horrible. They were fucking horrible as faces. And I understand, they did the, when they used to come out, they used to do the haka, slapping themselves. You know what I'm saying? Because, of course, it is Samoan heritage. But it was not going to fly going into, especially going deep later into the peak of the indie era, the indie takeover. You know what I mean? They had to change, they had to change. And what you saw basically was, I say 75% of how the Usos really were, how the Usos really are. Know what I mean? Because they're both from California. I think they're from Florida or California. One of the two. Right? They're from California. And there's a lot of Samoans there. You know what I mean? Samoans are cool people, right? But you got Samoans who you don't fuck with. You know what I mean? Samoans are deep. Samoans are deep. They got gangs out there and everything. You know what I'm saying? Samoans over there in the West Coast is, I'm pretty sure they got Samoans in, Texas. And they definitely got in Texas and fucking, Arizona, Nevada, Oregon. You know what I'm saying? Let me see. Utah, fucking, California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Nevada, Oregon. You know what I'm saying? That whole West Coast region, right? Samoans in California is basically the equivalent of Puerto Ricans in New York and in the East Coast. You got nothing but Puerto Ricans in the East Coast. Nothing but Puerto Ricans. It's the same thing. You know what I mean? But going back to my original point, look at the New Day. The New Day had to shed that fucking New Day, that power positivity garbage and then go heel. They had to. It wasn't going to work. And this is why, going heel and being booed is the greatest fucking thing to happen to any professional wrestler. Hands down. Because the fans make them into, the fans give them that realism. And then when they give it back to the fans, like, you know what I mean? Anyway, I'm about to be out, you know what I'm saying? Tomorrow's a brand new day, a new week and such. That means news, especially coming out of this garbage ass Forbidden Door pay-per-view and such. So I'm going to holler at y'all. All right? So take care. Have a good night. Peace.